left. And then our main event of the evening. Quick shout out, Alex Payne, Kurt Adonis, class of 2013. Class 2014, Knuckles Nelson, who was here, and Ron Zombie. And from 2015, the most infectious laugh in pro wrestling, my good friend, Slick Wagner Brown. All I could say for our next inductee is, well. And before I bring up his inductor, I just want to say that when I was working for Tony Rumble, Tony called me 1994, 95. He said, he said, big head. Call me Big Head. My head's not as big as George Carroll's. But he said, Big Head, it's a kid from New York that wants your job. He does managing, he also does ring announcing. He goes by the name Joey Jaguar. I said, oh, okay. So luckily I never lost that spot. But I want to say that when I started ring announcing for ECW in 1996, the Revere Wonderland dog track, this guy right here was my coach. He said, here's what you got to do. Here's what you don't got to do. When the gangsters come out, just get out of the ring. Sure enough, that first night, that was really good advice. And I think we've been pretty good friends for a long time. Even when he ripped his pants on a Friday night on a ECW double loop. Managed to get him sewed up for him, bring him back to him on Saturday for night number 2. And, of course, I'm speaking about the quintessential stud muffin. I love this guy, Joel Gertner, ladies and gentlemen. And it's been a long night, and I've been sitting over there, and I've been watching Joel right there. He has not moved from his seat at all. I love you, dude. I really do. And here to induct Joel Gertner into the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. He's a member of the 2011 class of the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. Ladies and gentlemen, he's the son of a preacher man, Ebony Blade.
All right. Since this is starting to look like an Oakland A's crowd, I'm going to move through this as quickly as possible. It's been a long time since I've said these words, but I'm going to try and say them again and see if they still work. First things first. Let the church say, Amen. We have left the cynicism of Sean Gorman, and I will present to you now a little bit more optimism very quickly. First of all, I do find it cute that Gorman thinks he could live in the same neighborhood as me. It's adorable. He drove here. Daddy don't fly coach. I fly first class. But what is also important here is some of the things he said, of course, and some of it in jest about this business being filled with scumbags, douchebags, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or as I call them in my other life, clients. Lifeblood. It has been my experience, as many of you know, born in England, raised in California, but my home away from all homes is New England. And it's especially because of the wrestling life in New England. But the story of this particular individual begins not in New England, but in New York. It is 1992, 31 years ago, this last May, where I took a job as a history teacher at Polytechnic Preparatory School in Brooklyn, New York. I was working their summer camp there when suddenly this kid comes up to me. And I can say kid now because I forgot that at 22 I was probably just a kid myself. He comes up to me and he says, I hear you were in pro wrestling. Yes, I trained out in California, Dr. Jerry Graham, Jesse Hernandez. Well, I didn't learn everything from from Dr. Jerry Graham. Jesse Hernandez, Bill Anderson, Don Diamond, a few others. I said, yes. He says, I love pro wrestling. Started to talk. I learned that this wasn't just a wrestling fan. This kid knew things. He knew history. He knew psychology. He was smart. And I don't mean just in the terms of smart like we say he's smart to the business. No, he was intelligent and witty. And in the span of a few weeks, just off the top of his head, somehow this kid had arranged for a wrestling event to take place at this summer camp. He promoted it. He came up with the idea. He hired the talent, including me and others. The great Ted Petty was also on that card. And it wasn't long before I started thinking, you know something? I might be working for this kid someday. And he proceeded to introduce me to the entire New York wrestling scene. Introduced me to George Ann Macropolis. I think there was Evan, I think Napolitano. You introduced me, after and I'd met before, but yeah, you introduced me there. And I remember the other thing, of course, we said, oh, and here's Vladimir. Being from the West Coast, my first thought was, who the hell is Vladimir? And then I instantly learned, well, we all know, Vladimir is the greatest fan in the history of anything at any time. We would go to the Garden together to watch wrestling matches. He took me to the Lower East Side Gym, where I met the greatest tag team partner I would ever have in my life, fabulous Billy Firehawk. And we were the first people to be managed by Joey Jaguar. Ladies and gentlemen, I said I would keep this brief, and I will. I am more excited today for this induction than I was for my own in 2011. Because let's look at what this young man did. He went off to Cornell and decided to leave Cornell to go join the circus of professional wrestling. And since then, he has become not just a promoter, an announcer, a wrestler, one of the most legendary managers of all time, an icon of fashion. When did a neck brace ever look so good? When? And my God, he did more for neckties than Pee Wee Herman and the Nation of Islam combined. The rhyming lyrical miracle. The man who I have been proud to say I knew as a boy and have seen him develop into one incredible young man. He has been an asset for the business. He has been an ambassador for the business as a lecturer as well. Ladies and gentlemen, with great pride, I would like to introduce to you and induct the rabbi of rhetoric, the cantor of chaos, the moil of mayhem. The Goy may not get it, but we do. We're okay. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome dear friend and a dear asset, Joe Gertner, to the 2023 New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame.
Extreme Championship.
Thank you. I'm worried, and to the dozen and dozen of you in the room still, I want you to know why it is that I'm concerned about something I should have started to get concerned about years ago and didn't get concerned about until this afternoon. They might have been right when they said, don't marry somebody in the business. My wife, in college and then out of college, worked for the World Wrestling Federation, WWE, at Titan Towers in publicity and public relations. I bring this up because it turns out that even though she never hangs her hat on this, and it's never really brought up in public, she apparently is indeed the better and bigger worker in our household. Because I expected today that she and Eric Anderson would be here. And instead of she and one or two friends, she surreptitiously, behind my back, arranged so that a throng of about 10 of my closest friends and chosen family, some from hundreds or thousands of miles away, have come here to be here today. My whole speech is going to be not to put myself over, but to put over them and everybody else in this room for being such a great part of the New England wrestling scene. Before I ever traveled the different states of this great land, and when I was very young, I knew as a young boy there was a Boston. It was the other garden. We had the real garden, Madison Square Garden, that had once actually been a garden, but was so important they moved it to the middle of the city. In Canada, they had an alternate universe garden known as the Make-Believe Garden. And I would watch wrestling from the Make-Believe Garden. And then in America, there was one more garden where everything was a little bit yellow and cluttered and smoky, and it looked different, but it was still wrestling, so I decided I would love it. And it was the Boston Garden right here in New England. First live event that I ever went to was at that real garden, Madison Square Garden. It was January 27th of 1986. It was, I believe, a Monday night, but it was not Raw. It was monthly MSG, TV, and house show. And the main event exists on countless Coliseum videos because it was Hulk Hogan in the 2-year anniversary into his first reign and losing for the first time by countout to Macho Man Randy Savage. In doing due diligence for something, I found out just a few months ago that the Space Shuttle Challenger unfortunately exploded the very next morning. I was home from school because I had been at my first wrestling show the night before, and it was a snow day anyway because the weather was terrible. I remembered at the time watching what happened on the small kitchen table TV, but until a few months ago, never knew the date. I could tell you for sure that my first wrestling show was January 27 of 86. I had no idea the Challenger exploded January 28, 1986. This makes me, in part, the lunatic that I am and the wrestling fanatic that I have always been. Over the decades, thanks to Extreme Championship Wrestling, Sheldon Goldberg and his NECW, and thanks to many others, I got to travel throughout this region as a teenager, young adult, eat many Perkins breakfasts after the show was over, and even find a part of New England to call my home and home base for my promotion, MXW. I would go on to live in Waterbury, Connecticut for 2 or 3 years, promoting in Bristol, in Waterbury, in Wallingford, all over the place, Toad's Place in New Haven eventually, and even reopened the Washington Avenue Armory in Albany, New York, the first wrestling tenant there since Vince McMahon Sr., and the wrestling tenant there that followed me was NXT and Vince McMahon Jr. All of this while living here in my second home of New England. I would like to thank Joe Bruin, the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, and all the people who work with and support it. My brother from another mother, Sebastian Cucagna, who, since my wife has surprised me with a half dozen friends I didn't expect to be here, he called me and told me that he had been called away and wouldn't be able to make it, and I'm half expecting him to pop up from the back of the room or through that door. I texted him as much at dinner, so we'll see if he shows or not. Whether he's here or not, he is here. He is my life coach, my sounding board, my voice of reason, returning the favor from the mid to late 90s during ECW, where I was his advocate, his advisor, and basically his lawyer, Mr. David Kleinfeld. Speaking of lawyers, let's hear it for the man who inducted me, Eric Anderson, Esquire, the Ebony Blade, Rick Darnell, the Gemini Kid. Eric is the barrister to the bad boys. Eric is the viceroy of vice. He is the solicitor of sin. Nick Halverson is here from Minnesota or Costa Rica. He spends half the year there now. He's an international real estate big shot. But in younger days, on my 18th birthday, which was about 3 or 4 weeks into my freshman year of college, away from home, where I had been sheltered like a veal, we decided that we would go out and get free drinks because the fraternities were rushing. But before we did that, since it was also Thursday night, the beginning of the college weekend, and my 18th birthday, we would pregame, which included me, of my own volition, drinking from an 8-ounce styrofoam coffee cup, since this is a family-friendly ceremony, as Sean Gorman proved the Manson family, apparently. Let's just say that the cup was full of Jose Cuervo brand blue agave milk. Nick is also a member of a squad that I was proud to be public address announcer for, the 1994-95 Cornell Big Red. And he wasn't just a standout there. He came to us by way of being a superstar wrestler for the Minnesota Golden Gophers, much like Brock Lesnar, Shelton Benjamin. He's laughing, but he knows. He owns more of Costa Rica than I rent in Brooklyn. It's fully legit for him to sell you property down there. I swear, he's not just a white man going into the jungle and squatting. He's got his gringo card and everything. So if you want to be a true American expat, hit him up. You're welcome, I think. And sorry for the damage I've done you. Eric Stefanowitz and Nate Lukart are here. They work for a New England-based pro wrestling company. First, MXW, and now a similarly large organization known as World Wrestling Entertainment. They work in the TV department. Eric was a right-hand man in MXW, had a keen eye for talent, helped me promote, helped me produce, helped me book. Nate was our one-man production department. He was not just the production arm, he was the whole throbbing body. I got a call one day. It was from Human Resources at World Wrestling Entertainment. Well, blow me over. As my moment finally arrived and discussion of hiring began, I was asked, so how exactly is Nate Lukehart to work with? I was a personal reference for Nate. He has moved on to bigger things, higher places, or as they say up there, onward and upward, pal. And I would like to think that some of it is because I shined him up real nice. And I'm not necessarily still waiting for him to return the favor. Just kidding. I'm unhireable. From high school, Mark Coluccio, Dave Schaum, and Kane Slomko are here. We used to go to wrestling shows together. Kane used to go to wrestling shows with me and Eric. We all went to shows with Eric and our friend Marcus, all of us together. Dave Schaum, I think he and his dad took us all to the Nassau Coliseum, I want to say May of '89. It was the same day that in the area, Hands Across America was going on. It was the biggest thing in the world. People would remember it for 34 years. I barely remember it, but I remember that the opening match on the program didn't make it, so it was replaced by another. But the original opening match that we should have seen and didn't see, the result of that match that never happened was printed in the New York Post the next morning. I have no idea how Hands Across America went, I couldn't tell you. We're thanking grandfathers today, which Don Vega reminded me to do, so I'll thank mine. So I went into the newsstand, and I was like 12, and it was like 87, and I wanted Glow magazine #1. I absolutely positively wanted to start from #1 so I could collect every issue of Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling magazine. And so I went and I got it out of the rack and I brought it up to pay for it. And the store owner did not speak English, did not read English. And I gathered as much because Glow magazine had been placed with all of the gentlemen's, the booby magazines. So my grandfather came in from the car where he was parked outside, and because they thought it was pornography, they did sell it to him, and then he gave it to me, and I had clothes. Big time score. Mark Coluccio, one of my friends that's here that I didn't expect, we went to an IWCCW show at some church gym or high school gym, and the ring announcer was his uncle, his father's cousin, Cowboy Dennis Alestra, a local auctioneer, and he did independent wrestling ring announcing. And it was 1990. I hadn't started working as talent yet. I was about 15. And there's a flag in the ring. They're about to play the national anthem. And Cowboy Dennis Alestra motions over to his nephew and says, and Mark walked through the ropes and held the flag during the playing of our national anthem. And I spent that next 2.5 minutes 10% considering the vast and ample greatness of our nation. And I spent the other 90% saying, that son of a bitch doesn't want to be a ring announcer when he grows up. He doesn't want to be the next Bobby Heenan. He may have been the first one to stand in a wrestling ring, and that's okay, because he loves wrestling too, and I watch WrestleManias with him in his basement. But I'm going to be the next one. Kane is here. Kane has helped out along the way in my wrestling journey. Kane is here with his beautiful wife, Denise. They are here with their son, Mason. Mason is waving. You will notice Mason not just because he is kind, friendly, empathetic, bright, and charismatic, but in the best way, you will notice Mason because he could be cast at any moment as Brock Lesnar, age 14, and Mason is but 10 years old. Whether Mason chooses sports like MMA or other sports he engages in, entertainment or anything else, just as his father is a successful artist, just as his mother is a successful educator and administrator, Mason is going to do great things in his long and prodigious life. I want to thank Robert Conti, who I went to school with all these guys, but I also went to summer camp with him first, since I was 6 or 7 years old. He introduced me to pro wrestling when I was 8. He was a big Roddy Piper fan, and I too became a big fan of heels and of talkers. So I want to thank him. Paul Heyman, my mentor. I'm an original Paul Heyman guy. I thank him he was the catalyst. He got me started. Well, I think was his. I wrote my own verbiage, and I thank him for giving me the freedom to, but well was his. He was into Bugs Bunny and stuff, and he just thought that it was a real heelish thing to say at the beginning of everything. Quintessential Stud Muffin was his, because the same way I did in ECW, what he did in WCW, and he trusted me with that, the same way he managed Rick Rude, and I was an antagonist for Rick Rude on his TV, I also haven't lost sight of the fact that he coined me the quintessential Stud Muffin in homage of the universal heartthrob, Austin Idol, who he managed in Alabama. Thank you to Jerry Jarrett. I knew I wasn't a one-trick pony. I was actually a two-trick pony when I had a 45 to 60-minute phone call with Jerry Jarrett inviting me to join TNA. Thanks to Tony Rumble, who loved my tape for IWCCW, Sports Channel New York, but because they lost the money or the time slot or some such, he loved the tape. He couldn't bring me in. I thought my life was over, and little did I know. And hopefully little do I still know, because the less you know, the longer you live. Thanks to Killer Kowalski, who, if I did indeed undersell his stomach claw, I never heard about it from him. He was such a pleasure to work with. It was an honor, and he was such a gentleman. Thanks to the Wonderland Dog Track in Revere, Massachusetts. So as we were getting changed in the locker room, we could hear the announcer put over the mechanical rabbit and yell, "There goes Swifty!" while we were changing. Much more pleasant was thank you to the Sting in New Britain, Connecticut, which was connected to next door Molly Malone's, a club for adults attracted to females. Even better than the dog track was our locker room atmosphere and situation there. I mean, you go to work and a bachelor party breaks out. I was once so late, by the way, at the Wonderland Dog Track in Revere that at 11 p.m., after taking the Boston trains for the first time in my life with my gear, I was going up the escalator, arriving at the show, while the fans next to me were coming down the escalator to leave after the main event. Thanks for all the blown paydays, Gotch. Thanks to the Worcester Palladium, where I enjoyed watermelon drunk with vodka with my friend Gangsta New Jack, and then went through the curtain as his nemesis and got my melon caved in by a steel chair by my friend Gangsta New Jack. We had our own ECW New England crew, promoters, referees, announcers, security, thanks to Paul Richard, thanks to Rich Palladino, thanks to Stuart Kaplan, and I don't know if any of them are here, and because of that, and I'm not into politics, so I cede the next 30 seconds of my speech to the gentleman from Montana, Bull Montana!
Ladies and gentlemen, at Wonderland Ballroom, there was an accident there. And there was a young gentleman, I didn't, I forget what happened. So I met Mr. Gertner there. I met all the greatest wrestlers from ECW were there. You know, and I like to mention a couple of my Boston, Joe and Nolan and everything. Perry Saturn, the late John Cole. John Cole. Joe, am I right? Every second. John, what was John's name? Yeah, the late John Carter.
John Cronus, the man who taught me, and I've known it now for life, don't park next to the Johnny Pump, brother.
You know, as you guys know, I got inducted before, but I still love coming to meet all the fans. Let me tell you, what Tony told me to say is, whatever you look up, you meet pardon me, meet a lot of the great talent. So I give you guys a lot of credit to come to the shows and all that, you know. And right now, you know, I get a little tears coming down. My buddy Tony is watching out. Everybody here and everybody here. So I want to thank my buddy Mr. Gertner. I'd like to thank everybody, fans, and especially Mr. Joe Bruin. Thank you guys.
Associated with Kowalski, with Tony Rumble, with the New England scene for over 36 years, the legendary Bull Montana.
But I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm gonna be 67 years old. I think I'm gonna be here for one more year, and after that, it's all over for me.
I want to thank John Cena Sr. I want to thank, wait till you hear this family carnival act. I want to thank Flying Fred Curry, Rocket Fred Curry, and even a young kid, Mason, he had you beat by 4 years. He was 6 years old or so, a kid that I named Nightlight Nick Curry. I once worked him on one of Sheldon Goldberg's shows, which allowed me for one night to make a living by getting punched in the face by someone who had been a toddler about 3 years earlier. So take that, Kenny Omega. Sheldon Goldberg's Facebook gives me daily affirmation. It gives me week-to-week wisdom. Last night on Facebook, he was talking to Finn Balor a while back, he said, and he told him, the big difference between them and you is desire. You reached out across the ocean to someone you didn't know, looking for an opportunity. It's one thing to do the drives. It's another thing to leave your country and everything you grew up with and literally travel to the ends of the earth to pursue success. Lots of guys have talent, but the burning, overwhelming desire to pursue excellence, wherever that takes you or whatever that takes you from, is not the norm. That's the main reason why you are where you are. So maybe I'm hopeful that since I don't have my father's work ethic, and he was a work smart, not hard guy himself to begin with, maybe believing that I was destined for some sort of greatness in wrestling based on truly being convinced that this is my calling, maybe all of that plus running off from college to join the circus is what has landed me here at this podium tonight. Thanks to all the full-service Marriotts around here. When I worked at Marriott and ECW at the same time in 1997 and only had 3 days off that calendar year, those properties let me put a copious number of ECW talent in their hotels for the brother price of $39 and never complained about getting worked. Some good wrestling people from around here who deserve to be recognized are Nancy Hanlon. I think of Paula, I think of Nancy, a friend, supporter of wrestling, a kind woman. A new friend of mine in the last 3 or 4 years who's here, Jim Tiso. Is he still here? You didn't leave yet, Jim? All right, well, anyway, here goes. Jim means well. I would trust Jim with my life. I lost a bet once, now I have to. Much like Nancy Hanlon, Jim is a human being. I don't want to say he's a bit of a butthole, so I won't. If I'm alluding to MXW, a lot of the names, you've half a dozen people at least in this room, Eddie Edwards, DC Dillinger, Maverick Wild, so many, Xavier, Josh Daniels, Mercedes Martinez, Slick Wagner Brown were in MXW in Connecticut, 2004, Ron Zombie, 2004 to 2010, Christine Coons, our staff photographer. There might be a dozen people in the room who've had ties to MXW. Thank you all. Gosh, I'm gonna wrap it up. Thanks to Todd Oxtolis. Thanks to Jason and Sherry. Thanks to all the people who are coming up at a certain time, young in the business, who trusted me to give them ideas, ring names, and gimmicks, even their first paydays. Thanks to every talent who performed on an MXW event. Special acknowledgement to Slick Wagner Brown. One Sunday afternoon, I thought it would be a good idea, and happened to have a wild bug up my ass, to do a show called Come What May. I loved the Wrestling Classic from the WWF in 1985, the first mass pay-per-view. So I wanted to do for MXW our own 16-man, one-day elimination show at Toad's Place in New Haven, which meant that it would have 4 rounds. Slick Wagner Brown was a late, last-minute replacement and came to the venue, and because all of the finishes were by random draw on my phone's random number generator, Slick was chosen to win the tournament, meaning in the course of 3 hours, he wrestled 4 full-length matches. As independent wrestling is and was, all I could send him in exchange was a pittance. That pittance came back to me. He probably moved to Sean Gorman's neighborhood. Sean picked his mailbox, took the check. I had to mail it again. I don't know to this day, I'm not sure whether Slick even cashed that check. If he did, he did. It was a pittance, like I say. Unfortunately, if he didn't, he didn't. The 4 matches he wrestled for virtually nothing could draw hundreds of thousands of dollars as main events for any promotion in the world. Last but certainly not least, because she's my publicist and she told me that this spot goes to her, even though I mentioned her earlier, I want to thank my wife, Susan Squeeze, who she tolerates with me calling that because it's what Jimmy Garvin used to call his girlfriends. She's the reason I'm here today as much as my mom is, because while she didn't give birth to me, she also hasn't killed me yet. Much like Andy Dufresne in Shawshank Redemption, she lives with a very complicated man, not the easiest book to read, and an occasional broken, random selection jukebox of emotion. While she is likely afflicted with non-diagnosed Florence Nightingale syndrome, or is otherwise some sort of masochist, and that's probably all that keeps her around, she helps me succeed and thrive, and be better every day. And it can at least also be said that she has good enough taste to know that life with me is always more exciting, like a husky midlife box of chocolates, than the alternative. Thank you, New England. Thank you, Joe Bruin. And thank you to the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame.
Freaking believable. We're going to wrap things up, ladies and gentlemen. Joel Gertner, that was amazing. Amazing, dude. I love you, dude.